So you're looking to buy a Datejust? Well, here at Bulang and Sons you are completely at the right place because we always have the finest ones in stock, and today I want to give you a guide to find your grail watch. So today I'm going to help you with this little guide, and I'm going to answer 10 of the most asked questions about the Rolex Datejust to help you further into the story. And the first question I want to start off with is maybe the most asked question that we get on a daily basis is the 36mm size of the Rolex Datejust too small for my wrist? And the most simple answer I can give to you, absolutely not. Because the 36mm size is a classic size, a beautiful size, but also very elegant size. And with most wrists, absolutely not too small. The most of the time I wear 36mm watches on my wrist. Most of the time I wear Datejust. I have 17.5 centimeter wrist, but also I know people with much larger wrists, like for example my father, who has an 18 centimeter wrist and also wear watches on his right wrist, which is 20 centimeters. The Datejust just never looks too small, in my opinion. I've seen people who tried it on and thought that it looked too small on them, but from my point of view, they never do, and I really think that the 36mm size is absolutely spot on and also very comfortable. Is the 36mm size too small for your wrist? Absolutely not. So that out of the way, another question that we get asked many times is which dial color should I go for? This is of course a very personal question in terms of aesthetic, because this is completely different for everybody. I will give you some advice though. There are many variations, especially with the vintage and neo-vintage Datejust, and if you want to know more about these watches, also check out our vintage about the difference between vintage and neo-vintage. But looking to Datejust, there is many options in dial colors. You can go from silver dials to white dials to black dials to blue dials to funky brown dials, tropical dials, pattern dials. And in my honest opinion, maybe the best dial color to start with is just a basic silver Soleil dial, because it's absolutely timeless, it fits with every type of occasion, it's also more accessible than color dials because it's basically less costly, and also there are many variations to choose from. But if you want to go into a different path, maybe look towards some color dials like black dials, which also suit with many occasions, maybe brown dials, taupe dials, which are very nice, warm, but also suit with many occasions. Bit harder to combine is a blue dial, because blue mismatches with different types of colors, but it's also very fresh. So looking to dial colors, I would really basically look at what is my style, what is my daily living, and what suits the best with this. One advice though, which I want to give to you, always go for the dial in the best condition, because condition of the dial is the most important of a Datejust, of any Rolex actually, of any watch actually. Rather go for a less exciting dial which is in perfect condition than a colored dial which is in not a really good condition. Condition of the dial is the most important thing in dials. Then of course you can also look to different structures, type of dials, like for example tapestry dials or linen dials, which also give a completely different vibe to the color. Then the third question, which we get asked many times, which I also answer a little bit already in the vintage neo-vintage video, which is, should I go for a plexi or sapphire crystal on my Datejust? Well, the basic difference between them is of course the material of the crystal. So plexi crystals are a very early form of plastic, which is very warm, doesn't look that clinical like sapphire, and really can make a big difference in the vintage references, because with some dial colors they can really enrich the look of the dial or make it more exciting, in which sapphire crystals, which are completely flat, they don't have the domed effect, and from nature on the materials already are much colder, can look more modern, more clean, instead of warmer and more vintage. The big difference between them is that plexi is of course the plastic material which scratches much easier than sapphire, but it's also much easier to polish out, even with some toothpaste. Sapphire crystals scratch less, but if they are broken or scratched, you simply need to replace them, and finding replacement versions can be a bit harder and also more expensive than with the plexi versions. But really my opinion is you need to look at which sapphire crystal or plexi crystal should I go for in terms of what suits your daily wearing, but also which dial color you have, because in both cases it can really enrich the color of the dial as well. Also, if you're looking to crystals as well, a question that we get asked on a daily basis is, can I wear a vintage model daily? The basic answer from my side is yes, of course. Me, my dad, we all wear vintage watches, not only Datejust but also Submariners, GMTs, Daytonas on a daily basis, which are in most cases plexi models. Some people are afraid to wear them on a daily basis because they think that they are a bit fragile, but I don't agree with this. These watches are made like tanks and really will survive a lifetime if you take good care of them, because they are made to be worn. And the vintage models really also looking toward movement and services. You can really wear them on a daily basis. I have over the last years. I think of all the watches I worn over the last 4 or 5 years, 80% are vintage Datejust in many variations. So that's my advice. Of course, there's a bit difference between them. At the end of the 70s, Rolex switched to a quick set date movement, in which you can set the date function easier. If that's your mojo, maybe you should go for that option. So this is just a choose in function. Then a question we get asked many times is which bezel type should I go for? With the Datejust you have many variations. It's not like, for example, Submariner or GMT. The Datejust features many different forms of bezels. You have some really rare variations, like for example bamboo bezels or stuff like that, but that's a bit niche, so I won't hop into that today. But the classic looks are the fluted white gold bezel, the reeded or engine turned bezel, which is a steel bezel, and the smooth bezel. These three completely have a different vibe to each other. The fluted bezel is very classy, it's very luxurious, very classic Rolex, even very classic Datejust, because most of the Datejust you see are fitted with the fluted bezel. This gives it a more elegant look, which in many cases really looks fantastic in combination with the Jubilee bracelet, in my opinion. If you're into a more sporty look, maybe look towards the engine turned or the smooth bezel, especially the engine turned bezel, which has the same sort of profile like a fluted bezel, but the cavings in the bezel are further out, which really gives it a more sporty, more sturdy look. And of course it's steel, so it has a different vibe than the white gold. And then of course you have the dome bezel, which is classic Rolex, which is the bezel you also see, for example, on the 1016 or Milgauss, which I absolutely love as well. I had a few and I really always felt attracted to these dome bezels. They are rarer, but also elegant and sporty in the same way. You can see these, for example, on the reference 1600 and 16000 and 16200, and really give the watch a completely different vibe than the both engine turned and fluted bezels. So just look at what your personal aesthetic is, your style is, and make your choice. So if you want to go for a bit sportier look, maybe you should go for the engine turned or dome bezel, and if you want to go for a classic Datejust look, go for the fluted bezel. There is of course a small difference in price. The dome bezels are much rarer and the fluted bezel also a little more expensive than the engine turned bezel variations. So I already talked about the combination between bezels and bracelets, for example the fluted bezel and the Jubilee bracelet, but also which bracelets to go for. You have two options in most cases, which is the Jubilee bracelet and the Oyster bracelet. There are of course different variations as well, like for example mesh bracelet, but that's also very niche. So today I'm only talking about the Jubilee and Oyster bracelet. Well, the Jubilee bracelet is of course very classic Datejust. Most Datejust you see on a daily basis are probably on the Jubilee bracelet. It's very elegant, it's classic Rolex, it has so much style in it, so much detail, it really enriches the look of the Datejust, and especially works fantastic with some dials, also with the fluted bezel like I talked about. But also these bracelets have more chance to stretch a little bit, because that's just the structure of the bracelet. In my opinion, it makes them a bit more comfortable. Then you have the Oyster bracelet, which is just absolute classic sport Rolex, which you see also on many Submariners, GMTs, Daytonas. This gives the Datejust basically a more sporty look, especially in combination with the bezels I talked about. I absolutely love a Datejust with a dome bezel and oyster bracelet. I think that looks super sporty, super cool. Then you have two variations. You have the folded Jubilee bracelets on Datejust and the folded oyster bracelets and the solid Jubilees and solid oysters. Basic difference between them is on the 4-digit Datejust references you can find the folded variations, and later they switch to the solids. The foldeds are a bit looser, a bit thinner, but also more comfortable to wear in my opinion, because they have a bit more stretch in them and really make the case of the Datejust also stand out more, because the bracelet is a lot thinner. Then you have the solid bracelets, which you see from the 5-digit and later 4-digit references on, which feels more modern and basic, and also really is nice, especially on 5-digit references. I really like those bracelets. That's just a aesthetic and wearable choice to make. Just what suits you best and what do you find comfortable. But my advice would always be to go for a nice Datejust with a good conditioned bracelet. That's more important, because the fantasy that all Datejusts still feature the original bracelet that it was sold with back in the 70s, 80s is not true. Many Datejusts have had a bracelet replacement or over the years, which is completely normal and also not a set of, in my opinion, because that is just how it works. Bracelets wear and tear and need to replace at some point or need to be restored. So the 7th question is a very important question, and a question I really get asked on a daily basis: is a Datejust a good investment? Well, sure as hell it is a good investment in your watch fund, because these watches are so good. There are still so many variations to explore. They really give that classic Rolex feeling on your wrist, so much style. They are very important watches for Rolex in their history, and especially in your wearable fun and your investing fun. Also, it is absolutely a good investment. It is still one of the last accessible Rolex models in a way. Many of the Rolex watches, especially sport models, especially vintage sport models, have gone super high in prices. So the Datejust is one of the last Rolex watches, together with the 34mm watches, which are still an accessible price range for many people. So if you're looking for Rolex, I really should hop onto them, because they will rise in price over the upcoming years. Like I said, there are many rare variations to find for still accessible prices. And finally, it's really gaining its deserved attention, in my opinion. They always have been a little bit underappreciated for many collectors, but as an investment turn, I really think that they will still get a moment in the future. They will raise in price, but really the big investment here is in your own fun. Then a question that we get asked many times, which also is a bit of fantasy world, is: does it come with box and papers? And really important thing to mention here is that box and papers are nice, but it's a rare situation to find a watch with box and papers, because many of the watches we sell are sold in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s. So these are watches that are older than 20 years, older than 30 years, older than 40 years. And how many things do you know that people bought all these years ago and still have all the paperwork with it? Over the years, people changed houses, cleaned up their rooms, thrown stuff away. So in the most cases, especially with Datejust, they don't come with box and papers anymore. It's more normal to see them without them than with them. And also the big difference is there is a huge difference in extra value of box and papers. Box and papers on a Datejust can easily add value of 1,500 to 2,000 euros to the watch, which for me is in many cases not worth it, especially with also sport Rolex models. The box and papers can be the same value as a Datejust on its own. So box and papers, like I said, are nice, but they're not necessary. And especially they don't tell anything about the authenticity of the watch, because papers are much easier to fake than the watch itself. So important note, if you're looking for a watch with box and papers, it's cool, but it's not normal to find them anymore with box and papers, and it adds a lot of extra value, which, yeah, it's your own choice if that's worth it to you. Then the question, is the Datejust an entry-level model? Well, in today's market, it maybe is, especially in combination with the 34mm watches. It is one of the last watches from Rolex, which is still an accessible price range. It was a prestige model from Rolex because I had old price catalogs of Rolex from the 70s. It was more expensive than all the sport models. So the entry-level model back then was a 1016 Explorer. Then you came to the Submariners, Daytonas, GMTs, and above all those watches, the Datejust was priced higher than those. So that's quite an interesting fact. It was for Rolex really a prestige model, which they based their brand on, which is something not many people think about these days. So it's absolutely not just a starter Rolex, it's a special model, a prestige model, and you should be proud to own any Rolex because, yeah, Rolex is just maybe one of the best brands in the world. Maybe it is. And absolutely you shouldn't see it as an entry-level model, just see it as a medallion or a prize on your wrist, which you worked hard for and you can enjoy for a lifetime to come. Then we come to the last question, what is my favorite reference or Datejust model? Well, I'm really a vintage lover, so for me the plexi models are the sexiest. I absolutely love the plexi models, especially certain references with the crystal without the cyclops, which can bring out the dial even better. And I really love cool silver dials with special markers, but also colored combo with structured dials. I had a tapestry dial for a long time, which I absolutely love. That dial really changed my opinion about structured dials because I always liked the Soleil dials and the Datejust, but the structured dials really came into my heart. So my favorite picks would be, like I said, I really like the dome bezels and the engine turned bezels, so I would go for a 16,000, which is a fantastic reference, which already features the quick set Dave movement. Cool to wear on a oyster bracelet, which gives it a more sporty look. Go with a funky dial or a nice silver Soleil dial. So that would be my advice. Or go for a 16030 or 1603 because it just looks a little bit more sporty, which I absolutely love. Also very cool in the Jubilee bracelet. And I also love the fluted references, but my personal preference always goes to these three references. So I hope I could give you a little guide today, answer some of your questions. And if you have any more questions, you can always contact us. We are happy to help you or to receive you here in our private lounge for some private watch shopping experience, compare some Datejust, or always happy to sell you your Grail Datejust or Grail watch in any occasion. We also still rely on our 14-day return policy for shipping, so don't worry for that. Just visit us in our lounge and we would help you to find your Grail watch. I hope we helped you. See you next time.